Welcome to this month's Novara Q&A. I'm so excited. I've never done this before. I'm Aaron Bastani, and I've got Rivkah Brown here too. How you doing, Rivkah?
I'm doing great. I'm feeling really energized after and despite the hour-long show, I feel like excited
Welcome
to
to
answer
this
everyone's
month.
questions.
Tonight we'll be answering your questions on politics, Novara Media, or whatever you'd like to ask. We've got a few questions lined up that you've already sent us. They were mostly sent in through Instagram, I think. But if you're watching live and have a question, send it on the super chat, and we'll also get to those. By the way, follow us on Instagram too. 230,000 followers there. I think that's really good. We're 30,000 short of Labour. You absolutely know I'm going to tweet about that when we overtake them. So let's go to your questions. Like I say, I'm really excited about this. And feel free to ask almost anything in the super chats. Meg Grace, I'll go to you with this one, Rivkah. Would you honestly recommend a career in journalism?
I mean, I feel like I was told by everyone that I ever asked about this when I was younger that it would be absolutely impossible to make a career for myself in journalism. And I think that's probably only become more statistically likely as time has gone on and my political convictions have kind of hardened and become more left wing. And I feel, and we could talk more about the origins of that later. But yeah, I have somehow like been able to find myself a kind of an incredibly supportive home in Novara Media. In terms of whether I would recommend it to others, like it is. I'm not going to lie, it is a very sparse media landscape, which is why supporting Novara and helping the left wing media ecosystem to grow, I think is such an incredible thing for people to do. But I would recommend journalism to people. I would say that thinking of it as your sole career, thinking of it as a full-time, employed job, unfortunately, at the moment, besides Novara and a handful of others, Byline Times, Declassified, but these places often only employ a handful of people. We're probably one of the biggest. The places that have the most full-time jobs in journalism that will pay you on the payroll are right-wing media outlets. They have the money, they have the training schemes, they have the resources to give people stable careers. And even then, they're making massive cuts. So I would say, I think in terms of advising other people to kind of think of a career in journalism, definitely write and definitely pitch to me. I'm an editor at Novara Media as well as being a reporter and a broadcaster, and definitely try and build up a portfolio of writing. But in terms of sort of quitting your job tomorrow and like looking for full-time jobs in journalism, unfortunately, you might be confronted firsthand with the incredible right-wing hegemony in our media ecosystem right away. And so I think what a lot of people do, and I do suggest to people, is to kind of have a side hustle. And a lot of people that we commission at Novara are academics. A lot of them work in publishing or are students or have other work that they do. I'm not saying that you can't be like me and that that I'm not going to enable people to I'm going to pull the ladder up after me. That's exactly not what I intend to do. I hope that by the time by 2024 we have 5,000 more subscribers, and that those subscribers enable us to hire more people. So that's exactly what we're trying to do through the fundraiser. But in terms of a kind of career as a left-wing journalist, it is a hostile environment.
Yeah, I'll feed in quickly. I think if you want to be a journalist, you should absolutely look to do that. Would I recommend it? I mean, I wouldn't recommend many jobs, really, given the pace of technological change and the uncertainty around a whole host of things, falling real wages in a bunch of industries too. So what I would say, just building on what you said there, Rivkah, is by all means become an expert on something where you think you can add real value. And if you think you'd be a very good data journalist, you have skills in that area, or a video journalist, you've got skills in that area, you can actually make it work, right? Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. You can make it work, whether it's being a live streamer, whether that's being a videographer, whether that's being an expert on a particular issue. You can make it work. But I think you're right to say, Rivkah, look, the days of somebody writing a column and being able to afford a 3-bedroom flat in Notting Hill are long gone. By the way, that's the world that most sort of 65-year-old centrist journos inhabit. They think that is still the world, which I wish it was. Sadly, it's not. But if you want to be a journalist, you absolutely should, commit yourselves to, potentially going in that direction. But it's a funny old world out there. What jobs are there really that we can say will definitely exist in 25 years? I was asked this by a young man recently, and I said, really? That's going to pay well beyond medicine? Very hard to predict. And even that, as you're seeing right now with the NHS. Rachel Jones has a £5 super chat. Thank you, Rachel. Simple question. Will Trump win? I'm trans and absolutely terrified on what the effect of him winning will have on the UK. I know you've got strong feelings about this, Rivkah, so I want really you to answer this question, though I'll just quickly go first about the Trump winning bit. Trump can absolutely win, right? It's one of those things which I think people are sort of sleeping on. He is still the favorite to become the Republican candidate. The weakness of the Republican field is becoming more and more obvious over time. You have this young guy, what's his name, Ramek? He's polling like 15% amongst Republicans. I personally don't think US Republicans would want a brown guy as a Republican nominee. And I think fundamentally he's the strongest candidate in that field. Can he beat Joe Biden is a separate question. I think he can. I'll end with this. What you have to understand with US politics is that the Democrats need to win the popular vote by around 3-4 million to win with the Electoral College. So when you see Trump polling something, Biden polling something, you have to factor that in. So I think him winning is more likely than we probably think at the moment. And of course, Biden, quite gaffe prone. So is Trump, by the way, but quite, gaffe prone, could play against him. Fundamentally, the sort of the foundations, the fundamentals of the US economy, quite good at the moment. Certainly not like 2020 with COVID, which favors the incumbent. So for an incumbent to lose 2 elections in a row would be unusual. That would say Biden. That would suggest Biden. But also I think the chances of Trump winning are far higher than people really seem to not comprehend, but seem to be saying at the moment. Rivkah, what's your read on this?
Right. I mean, as you say, Trump's so much the favorite to win amongst the Republicans that he's not even turning up to hustings. Like he's just kind of taking a back seat until there is actually some competition. And I think there is also a degree of complacency, a complacency that obviously we saw the first time Trump got elected, when Democrats were riding high on their success, and in that case, back then, the historic success of a black presidential candidate in Barack Obama. But now, the success of his vice president, and the fact that they've kind of finally got their hands back on power after just one term, which was obviously in some ways unexpected. So I think also we have to bear in mind this classic thing, which actually Naomi Klein points out in her new book Doppelganger, which is the tendency of the left and the right to operate in a one-way mirror kind of situation, whereby the left pays very little attention to what the right is doing, but the right is tracking our every move, and they are paying minute attention to the left, its rhetoric, its tactics. They are eyeing up, as our questioner pointed out, trans rights. They're already beginning to find the Achilles heels in the left movement, which, I mean, trans rights is definitely one of. The left is incredibly divided on this issue because of the success of transphobes, or TERFs, particularly trans exclusionary radical feminists who paint themselves as being on the left, of dividing progressive movements within themselves. So I think we have to be very mindful here that, like, whilst we might be sort of, or at least not we, but progressives in America, and us by extension from afar, sort of thinking that Biden is sort of riding high on this wave of economic growth and pandemic recovery, they're coming for us, and Trump is making incredible progress towards the 2024 election. And I think, we had Suella Braverman at the top of our show just earlier this evening, and her visit to America. Conservatives and big dog conservatives in the UK are going out to America, in part because they're kind of maybe thinking of an escape and a kind of a sort of post political career in American think tanks off of frontline politics, but perhaps also because they're signaling to Trump and to a potential Republican government that they think might be coming in 2024, and that they might eventually work in partnership come the next 2030, whatever will be UK general election. So it is a bit of a long game that the right does play, and I think that the left is always at risk of being blindsided by it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting as well with regards to Republicans that it's obviously not just Trump. It's not like it's Trump won and then you've got I don't know. I'm trying to think of a moderate Republican these days. They barely exist. Um, a John McCain figure from 2008. It's Trump, Ron DeSantis. I guess you've got Chris Christie, but he's nowhere. Ron DeSantis was looking like maybe the anti-Trump candidate. He's kind of fluffed it. So this is now a huge capture of the Republican Party and taking it in a very distinct direction. What I would add as well, Rivkah, is that it's not just trans rights, abortion, anti-abortion activism. That is absolutely on the rise. And that is absolutely being funded by these same people. And quickly, before we go on to the next question, like you say, the extent to which the right looks at the left and the left doesn't look at the right, it really, it gets to me. It gets to me. I think a lot of us don't realize the game they're playing, the level they're playing at, the stakes they're playing for. And maybe it's going to take a long time for the left to get used to this, because of course, for so long, the political sort of formation in the vanguard against the right was the center left. And the center has just disappeared in that respect. And I think it's going to take people a long time to realize the responsibility now that sits on the left to help define the future. Not entirely. We don't have all the ideas. I think we have most of them. But without that responsibility, we're in big trouble. And that's not just around policies, that's about strategy too. It's a huge responsibility. And I agree with that. One of the podcasts I love listening to, love's the wrong word, I get a lot from, I listen to Patrick Bet-David. And, the way they're on the right, they're Trump supporting Republicans, the things they say about the Republican primaries are hugely informative to me, far more than what The Guardian says. So I think that's a really great piece of advice there, Rivkah. Let's go to your next questions. On Super Chat, Michael RCH asks, as environment, climate, and energy are such critical... I'll start again. On the Super Chat, Michael RCH asks, as environment, climate, and energy are such critical issues now, would you consider hiring someone to cover that beat and add depth and accuracy to your reporting on these issues? Rivkah.
Well, I mean, I think it's a really good point that having dedicated beats is something that Novara should, as it grows, seriously pursue. And that's why we've hired Polly Smythe, who's brilliant and is our labour movement correspondent and is at the moment our only sort of dedicated beat reporter, which is obviously a kind of role that most conventional publications would have. But most of the rest of us are sort of jacks of all trades. But obviously, as we grow, that's something that we want to change. And that's why we want to grow. One of the most difficult things about being a reporter is getting to really own your brief, getting to really sort of know and trust your sources, or really getting your sources to trust you. And as a result, getting exclusive stories and getting the kinds of stories that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get. And so I would love us to have a dedicated climate reporter. And that's why we do fundraisers, because we want to be able to diversify and to intensify what we do. But I would say it is intensify rather than diversify. We already do a fair bit of climate reporting. In particular, my colleague Claire Heimer in the articles team, this is something that she really cares about and has written about at length. She often commissions stuff on, and like we do really in-depth reporting, including something that which no other publication would do, which is in-depth reporting on climate movements, unpacking why have XR bit changed their strategy, why have Fridays for Schools or Fridays for Climate, been so successful? Or why have they dipped, and are they making a comeback? And this kind of intra-leftist analysis is something that I think is one of Novara's USPs, as well as holding the government, as well as holding all sorts of actors accountable for their own role in kind of climate catastrophe. So I think we already do a fair bit of that, and I think that there's probably a number of people that would gun for that kind of position if we created one. But you have the power to create one, so please do.
Yeah, we can't promise that there will be a new person committed to just covering climate if you do, but look, it certainly makes it more possible. Hayley with £5. I recently doubled my monthly donation to NM. Really thankful we have NM to represent the left. Thank you so much, Hayley. That means a lot. Aaron, how are you doing after the recent attack? I'm doing very well. For anybody who's not aware of what happened, I was assaulted near my home by somebody I'd never met before. They knew my name. I pacified them, I suppose, the best way to put it. He was about my height, but probably about 10 kilos lighter. So it wasn't a problem. Split my lip. He was then arrested, was charged. There'll be more about that coming out in the next few months. Nothing too dramatic, really. But yes, thank you for asking. I am fine. Of course, our worry is here at Novara that something happens again in the future with somebody with a weapon. This is not a light thing to discuss, really. It's very serious. And I have to say, it's the second time it's happened to me. So a few years ago, I had somebody from Pegida UK, which is a far-right movement, live streaming outside my house saying, you know, come and talk to me. Ironically, I wrote in the comments, well, you know, I think, you know, you're wrong about this, this, and this. And then he blocked me. So you had the spectacle of this idiot saying, come and talk to me. But then I tried to talk to him on Facebook. He wouldn't talk to me. And I wasn't at home. So they were also wasting their time there too. But very kind of you to ask, Hayley. I should say that it's also very kind that you've doubled your support for us. And if anybody wants to support us, if they're not already, novaramedia.com/support is the way to go. And as I said in the show earlier on, our evening show, you know, 2024 could be the year of a general election. I really think, with the live show, with our reportage, with articles, with our newsletters, our interview shows, but particularly, let's be real, with the live show on a daily basis, I really think we can have a massive impact on the complexion of that general election. Not who votes for who, but what stories are being discussed, whose voice is being listened to, what things really matter. And I should say as well, I think Novara Media offers real bang for buck. You know, we have 230,000 people following us on Instagram. I think we reached 10 million people a few months ago in a single month, 200,000 on TikTok, almost 400,000 here on YouTube. I think with our politics, there is a huge audience that we can reach. And I think in a general election, we can do a hell of a lot with it. Thanks, of course, to our amazing supporters. So if you want to join those guys, go to novaramedia.com/support. Multiple people are asking Rivkah about why she loves saunas. So quickly, Rivkah, why do you love saunas?
I sort of posted this as a joke on my Instagram story, but I am really pleased to have a chance to talk about it. This is like just a minute. I've already lost. I've already fumbled. But I came back from Finland with an equal love of trains and saunas. I was already getting into it before I left, but I'm now a full-fledged supporter, and not just as a leisure activity, as a proletarian leisure activity. You know, saunas and bathing culture was something that like most working class people would participate in many countries in Western Europe, in Eastern Europe, you know, and the Schwitz, you know, the kind of tradition of Jewish communal bathing is something that has been totally lost. And like having recently started to re-engage with it, I cannot preach enough the mental health benefits, the physical health benefits, and just the kind of community making sort of effect, you know, when you keep going back to the same communal baths week after week. And I think that there's really few, you know, Aaron, you often talk about the destruction of the high street, but one of the effects of that, and one of the effects of the broader destruction of communities in this country through things like the high street, but also, you know, all kinds of kind of public architecture, is that we just don't have places to meet people and to hang out without spending money and without usually meeting people that we know already. So I think, like, for me, just saunas have become really emblematic of so much of how I think society needs to change. You know, it's like the amount of money you could save the NHS by socially prescribing saunas for everyone is just incredible. So, I mean, I'll leave it there, but I'm a big sauna evangelist now.
I love it. I would add as well to the health benefits of the saunas, you know, this idea that it's a luxury good. We're a cold country, right? Particularly in the north, Scotland. You probably want places where people can be warm and cozy. You know, I know the Scots, they do it quite well in the middle of winter. Whiskey, blazing fire. The English don't really do that very well. And it's something I really noticed in Iceland, you know, as well, like hot pools. And not just like natural pools, like you'd have rooftop hot pools in Reykjavik, and it's 5 degrees, but you get into that and you come out and you see that, oh, it's gorgeous. That doesn't cost huge amounts of money. But that's exactly the sort of stuff, like you say, Rivkah, we don't prioritize that stuff because of the political economy of our system. Okay, these choices are made because of our economic system. Oliver Kant with £2. Should all media be subscriber owned as a model? Quickly, I don't think so. I think you would have some co-ops. I think some people just really enjoy working alone. Some people do. And it works through the market mechanism. Like, I'm trying to think of Gary, our head of video. He loves Johnny Harris. He seems to make a good living on YouTube, and I think he produces amazing stuff. I think we should have more supporter-based stuff. I think relying purely, and this is where it gets really interesting, right? Is that relying purely on the market mechanism has clear downsides, but we don't even have the market mechanism anymore because the price of information has fallen. So at least 50, 60, 70 years ago, if you had the startup capital, you could say, let's start a left-wing newspaper because we know there's lots of left-wing people, they'll buy it. That didn't really work with there was a thing called the News on Sunday, which failed in the 80s, but the Daily Worker, the Daily Herald, which is now the Sun, which was the biggest paper in the country in the 30s. There were huge audiences for this thing. Today, that doesn't really matter because people want free information. And so what happens then is even worse than the market mechanism is that the only way you can get involved in the news game is if you're a billionaire or a state, if you're Rupert Murdoch or Qatar. Look at the people that are looking to buy the Telegraph, which, by the way, actually makes a bit of money with the paywall. The Saudis, the Qataris, Paul Marshall, who also has GB News. So this idea that, even the market system, which is what the centre-right would have defended for the whole of my life, that isn't there either. So I think certainly more of it. I think in an ideal situation, you'd have some state funding, rather, for local media. You see this in some Scandinavian countries. I would love to see local newspapers subsidised by the government because I think local news is really important. Do you want to say anything there, Rivkah, or any strong feelings around how to pay for media?
Well, I agree with you, Aaron, about the importance of state media and state-funded media. I think that, the BBC in theory is a great idea. It's just that in practice, it is not actually independent of our government. It's more like a state media than it is a state-funded media. And I do think, I know you've sort of wanted to present the whole smorgasbord of different ways of funding your media. But I do think, just to quickly make the case for subscriber-owned media and how, compared to places that I've worked in the past, that haven't been subscriber-owned, that have been very advertising-driven, it's a completely different game. We write the stories that we want to write and our audience wants to hear. And I think also to say that our audience has an important voice in that, but I don't think that, I think the question specifically was subscriber owned. I don't think that subscribers should be able to completely dictate what we do either, because I think there is an important kind of dialogue to be had. Part of our job as Novara, I think, is also to kind of shift discourse to the left and to sort of nudge our audience even to the left by telling them things that they might not want to hear. So I think that there is actually a role for our own editorial independence from our supporters and subscribers. But certainly, being subscriber funded from my own journalism has allowed it to be vastly more interesting, vastly less clicks driven, and vastly more principled. I had pieces pulled from my desk because the billionaire owner of the newspaper that I was working for didn't want them published. And this was, I'm just going to say it, this was at the Independent. It's in the name. We were by no means independent from Evgeny Lebedev, the man who we worked for. And it's just a totally different ballgame working for somewhere that's subscriber owned. So maybe it's not the utopia that we can roll out to everywhere, but it's certainly, a little slice of utopia that we are trying to expand.
Yeah, I'd also add, I think, as we do more events, which is something we absolutely want to do outside of London, I think that's going to bring us closer to our audience anyway. And I think that will be a really interesting, productive conversation, tension. Quickly on Johnny Harris, people are saying he's a lib. Look, nobody's following Johnny. I'm not. I like his videos on Lake Como, not his political takes. I think the same applies to Gary. Just saying. Jamila Asfu with a tenner on Super Chat. Thank you, Jamila. She says, thank you so much for your great work and don't give up. You are our voice. Jamila, that means so much. And it is just crazy, right, how much media doesn't represent anyone. I find that astonishing, really. When you look at support for things like public ownership of water, energy, how many media outlets not even champion this stuff, talk about this stuff in a sensible, informed way? Gazaru asks, if there is one thing you could change about our, quote, democratic system, what would it be? Forced representation. PR. We won't get it from Labour, but it should be what they give us. PR. I think they'll do 101 things instead of PR. And I think some of those things might even be counterproductive. PR. if you said choice between a Supreme Court, which we were given by Blair, and PR, I would take PR. Laws reform or PR, constantly. They want competition in every aspect of life. Outsourcing, right? We need competition. They don't want it in politics. They want the party duopoly where they don't have to worry about losing their job. Philip, do you see the Tories going further to the right during their period of opposition? I like your optimism, Philip. What do you think, Rivkah?
I mean, why not? It in the sense that, they're going to be trying to really clearly distinguish themselves from the Labour Party, which will be doing a fair bit to present itself as Ash has said, the Tories with a red rosette. I think they're going to have to go further to the right. Like, they've got nowhere else to go unless they, like Dominique Samuels, take a load of ayahuasca or whatever and decide that they've got it all wrong and actually support Hare Krishna. I really recommend that Medium post if you haven't already seen it. This is the woman, by the way, who recently sort of let slip that the Daily Mail had offered her ghostwritten articles that were designed to kind of stoke a culture war about Notting Hill Carnival. Like, total nonsense. But apparently she's had a massive change of heart thanks to the Channel 4 series. I think it's called Higher Ground, where they get people to debate each other on mushrooms. This is a Novara Media Q&A. I probably shouldn't be promoting other people's content, but watch it. It's so brilliant. But anyway, I doubt that they're going to have the kind of revelation that someone like Dominique Samuels has had. I think it's much more likely that they'll sort of try and double down on their advantage, which is that they are the kind of conservative party and that they are the kind of party that doesn't have to hold itself to any kind of moral standard. I know that they're averse sometimes to being seen as the nasty party, but ultimately, I think they slightly revel in it. I think they are appealing to people who don't mind a bit of nastiness in politics if it will preserve the integrity of the nation state, which we heard earlier today, Suella Braverman calling like the greatest thing that has happened to Western civilization or whatever. So yeah, 100%. We're going to be seeing some absolutely insane bollocks. Am I allowed to say that? Coming out of the Tory party. And unlike Labour, they're not going to try and make any attempt at being seen as kind of suit-wearing sensible politicians. Liz Truss is already saying that she has no regrets. So the idea of kind of fiscal responsibility, I think, is not necessarily the same kind of thing that Labour feels that it needs to prove as the Tories do. So they'll be throwing out some crazy numbers, billions here on, hanging migrants in the stocks and billions there for changing everyone's home toilets to single-sex toilets and all sorts of insane stuff. I think it's going to be quite fun.
We've got Matthew Faustini with $2 in Super Chat. Joe Biden on UAW, Automotive Workers Union. Picket line, thoughts? I'm shocked. Who would have thought this? In 2020, Joe Biden is to the left of the Labour leader. Because, of course, in early 2020, let's say 2019, you had Jeremy Corbyn. And it seemed that Keir Starmer, he was pitching himself as Corbynism like Corbyn. I didn't believe that. I thought he was quite right wing, but I didn't think the whole policy agenda would slip this far to the right. I certainly didn't think he would. Actually, I did. I kind of did. But I still think it's quite astonishing that, within the space of 5 years, we've gone from Jeremy Corbyn leading the Labour Party to a US Democratic president being further to the left than the UK Labour Party leader. Because often, they adore America. They watch The West Wing. They ingest it like it's Pringles. They just can't stop eating West Wing box sets, these people. And yet they're not being infused by Biden in that respect. What's your reading at Rivkah? I mean, I am surprised, by the way. I didn't think Biden would be anywhere near this left wing. I was a Bernie bro. And if it wasn't Bernie, it was Liz Warren. I obviously thought Biden was better than Trump, but I thought the guy was I still think he's a bit of a joke. I don't think he's necessarily the best person for the job. Right. But the quality of his agenda in government in terms of state intervention, industrial policy, support for organised labour, it's mixed, by the way. There's been occasions where he's really, he's screwed over organised labour. But going on a picket line is not something I expected to see from Joe Biden as US president.
No, totally. I mean, like, this was a president who I famously remember there being a whole sort of left wing parody account before his election called Settle for Biden. You know, this was a reluctant sort of concession for the left, but has ended up being like much, you know, a pleasant surprise. And you know, we can only hope that something similar will become of Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And, you know, the news today or yesterday, I think it actually came out about Labour taxing private schools, you know, could be. I want to believe, you know, I desperately want to be optimistic about it being a sign that there might be good things to come. And once they're in government, things might change. And Biden is an example that could be the case. But equally, he's fighting a very different battle and you know is presiding over a period of economic prosperity, as you say, and has like just kind of in some ways like a more secure position. Like Starmer is going to inherit the most, you know, chaotic, you know, there's still going to be the ongoing rack crisis probably, you know, we're going to have like further waves of recession and energy crises as the war in Ukraine drags on and on. You know, we're going to have deals that the government is locked into, like this Avanti 9-year or at least 3-year deal. And so I'm not sure that like, you know, Starmer's going to feel like he has that sort of wiggle room. But now, like, I'm sure Biden feels like he's kind of more comfortable. Perhaps there's also, and I'm not so informed about the kind of particular electoral positioning and jostling that's happening, but there could be an attempt to put a kind of very clear stake in the ground between him and Trump, who also is attempting to go for like much more clearly than the conservatives and much more aggressively for the kind of blue collar vote. These are auto workers, many of whom I'm sure voted for Trump, you know, when he was running against Obama. So this could be also a strategic play to kind of secure a working class vote that he's much less sort of confident with as a sort of coastal, you know, middle class leader.
I think that's really astute, Rivkah, because that was the big story of 2016, wasn't it? That, you know, the path to the White House for Trump came through Rust Belt, Appalachian states. Trump was really big on the kinds of things that are really hitting blue collar America. I think, was it in Pennsylvania? I think that, you know, basically Clinton just spent a tiny amount of time there. And of course, you had the Brexit vote the same year. And so people were looking for the parallels, which is legacy centre-left party with a purported connection to the Labour movement. Of course, that's less strong historically with the Democrats, completely out of touch with the working class, and into that vacuum is coming the right. I don't buy that entirely. And of course, they're two different countries. But I think that's a really important point you're making, Rivkah, which it was widely acknowledged that Trump won because he was winning blue-collar workers or former blue-collar workers in certain states. That doesn't mean he won working-class America, but in certain states, which got him over the line, they really mattered. And it's interesting that hasn't happened here. You know, Brexit was meant to be our kind of the jolting to our system, and yet nobody is saying Keir Starmer needs to show support with blue-collar workers in the Red Wall. Again, it's I think a term that probably confuses as much as it clarifies. Nobody's saying that he should, you know, stand on picket lines with workers in those places. And of course, in the Red Wall, you know, there'll be many people who support the Labour movement, whether it's striking nurses, striking train workers. I'm not saying these people command massive support everywhere, but particularly with nurses, huge support. I don't think it would have hurt to go on a picket line. And I think you're right. So it's an interesting question as to why that's not happened. Thanks to Yi with £20 on the super chat, who says, "Keep up the good work, guys. I have subscribed on the website as well." Thank you, Yi. It'd be wonderful to know if you're coming from, it must be the UK with £20, right? We did a great story recently on Hong Kong. It was great to see the analytics. I'm just saying this because it's a non-Anglophone name. My apologies, Yi. But I find this fascinating. On Hong Kong a few years ago, and we were looking at the analytics, and like 30% of our audience for 1 week, we didn't know what they were, where they were coming from. It was people from China who were using various ways of circumventing the Great Firewall. Amazing. I mean, that is an audience we would love to grow. Our non-UK audience, a global audience around issues such as labour rights, climate change, and self-determination. Big Benji, where do your political convictions originate from? Rivkah.
I mean, I think a lot of my political convictions come from my experience as a Jewish person and through my Jewish identity. I was, as many of you know, if you follow me on Twitter, raised by parents who supported the Labour Party, but like most Jewish people in this country, were also supportive of Israel. And I wasn't only sent to a Jewish school, it was also a Zionist school, went to a Zionist youth movement, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it was through the process of kind of, I want to say de-radicalization, but maybe there's a less inflammatory version of that, deprogramming of some of that Zionism through visiting Palestine as a young adult, through study of post-colonial literature and theory, that I think I began to construct my own politics, which I think was very difficult because I had a very, very strong kind of political dogma installed in me. And I think, then in terms of domestic politics, really, the kind of Corbyn project and the way that Jewish people were, as we know, treated as footballs, anti-Semitism was weaponized, really clarified to me what my objections were with the racial politics as well as the kind of foreign politics that I was brought up with. So I think it really kind of originated in that, and then everything else sort of grew around it.
Yeah, for me as well, just quickly. I think a big part of it was my dad was Iranian. Just was. So he was just like, I don't trust the news. Guess what? That sort of percolated through to me. CW with $10. By the way, I was also just radicalized by the labor market and renting. I graduated in 2007-8 when the entire global economy fell off a cliff. That happens. And I will never forget this, by the way. I should say this. I had a friend who went to UCL. We did a great interview recently with Dan Evans about how, the creation of a lumpen bourgeois, because, he talks about how these people are petty bourgeois, not working class. People like myself who basically saw their hopes, ambitions, expectations diminish after the 2008 crisis. I had a friend who came from a nice middle-class family, went to state school, I hope he doesn't mind me saying this. His dad's an architect, nice middle-class family, lovely family. Lovely family. I don't mean, obviously, lovely families from all backgrounds, but you know what I mean. And he went to UCL to his undergraduate, went to the LSE, got a distinction, got a first, blah, 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 blah. And he graduated, and then he was working unpaid in a think tank. He was working full-time in a bar, and he was living an extraordinarily horrible life, just a really harsh life. And you could see it sort of dawning on him, and I think it was probably the same as he looked at me. We were just like, wow, this is really hard work. Living in London, unless you want to work in finance, very hard to make a living. So that is also quite radicalizing. I don't live in London anymore, but it was quite radicalizing at the time. CW with $10. Do you think there's any chance Keir Starmer will shift left once in office and re-adopt many of his now dropped pledges? I love your channel, guys. You're awesome, and I've learned a lot. I said this actually on Sunday to a person I met at a literary festival who said that Starmer is a sheep in wolf's clothing. They sort of capsized the metaphor or the simile, which is to say he's a good guy presenting himself as a nasty guy to get into power. I would love that to be the case, right? I've criticized Keir Starmer many times on this show. I've written articles criticizing him. I would love to be proven wrong. I would love Keir Starmer to take power and adopt a policy agenda, a political agenda, significantly to the left of what he's been doing over the last 18 months. Do I think that's likely? No. There is no precedent for a prime minister coming into power and moving left. There is none. It doesn't happen. So I think the institutional forces against you anyway push you right. So a gentleman with his politics going into that situation, with the fiscal situation being what it is, you haven't got much cash unless you increase taxes. He doesn't want to do that. I think his mindset is to not necessarily upset people too much. I would be surprised. It would be the biggest surprise of my political life. But I'm only in my late 30s, so maybe. But I don't think so. I do think he may do one or two interesting / good things. because people in his cabinet really care about it, right? So I do think we might get public ownership of rail because 2 or 3 members of the cabinet, a few trade unions really care about it and they really push it. I do think they might do something about the housing crisis because the bedrock of their vote in cities are people that can't get on the housing ladder. Think of all those London MPs, Manchester MPs. So there are things which I think may push him in a good direction on some issues, but generally no. We'll go to Sanam Singh Kaneja next. Actually, no, I'll go. It's a good question, Rivkah, but I gave a long answer. So if you could give a short one, that'd be helpful. What do you think about the prospects for Starmer going left if he becomes PM?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, really slim. There's no historical precedent for it. But I say the one thing is, they've bought into the logic of austerity, understanding the public kind of finances as if it were a household budget. There's just not enough money in the kitty to scrap tuition fees, to nationalize rail, to XYZ. However, a decade of Tory austerity means that the logic of austerity has already been proven wrong. It doesn't work to just cut public spending. You don't grow. You can't cut your way out. You can't cut your way into growth, is what I'm trying to say. You have to spend your way into growth. And I think if Starmer wants to be re-elected in 2030, he's going to have to demonstrate some kind of track record. And I think that it might become apparent that some kind of capital spending, some kind of big and ambitious project is going to be necessary. Labour can't rely in the same way that the Tories can on stoking a culture war, throwing hundreds of millions of pounds, deporting people on empty planes and putting them on asylum barges. It just won't work. So they're going to have to stand behind some kind of economic growth and bettering of people's lives, because that is the Labour promise. And I think that once in government, it might become apparent that simply to strip private schools of charitable status isn't going to cut it. So that's my only potential optimism.
Someone in the comments, not a paid comment, Kid Starver is not the guy. It was certainly a memorable name he was given recently. Sanam Singh Kaneja. Which football teams do the Novara Media team support? Who do you support, Rivkah?
I mean, historically, this is controversial with my family because me, my brother, and my dad all support different teams. It's just a mess. I am historically an Arsenal supporter. My brother was from birth because I made him one, but then he became a glory hunter and switched to Man United. Despite the fact that my dad is a Spurs supporter, obviously historically Jewish supporters. But yeah, me and my brother are both traitors to the race. I'm not sure about my other sibling. They are undeclared. I don't know why I felt the need to go through my entire family. My mum also undeclared, by the way.
I love it. So your brother's a Cockney Red, like Rio Ferdinand.
Yeah, he justifies it on the basis that my we have family links to Manchester and we have family there, but we also live a stone's throw from the Spurs stadium. So it's all a big mess, and we just don't talk about it in the most British of ways.
That's really interesting. I support Bournemouth, and I also have a big soft spot for Man United. My dad was a fan as I was growing up. And of course, they were immensely successful. They won a hell of a lot after 92-93. The inaugural Premier League champions. Although I find it interesting, Rivkah, your brother is a Man United fan because he was a glory hunter. I mean, they've not won very much for 10 years. So how old is your brother quickly?
He's made a very bad bet. He's 24.
Okay. So he was the kind of tail end. Poor guy. Yeah. We have Chef.sim who's asking, will we ever see the producer? I presume they mean Fox or Alex. We also had the head of video. I want to do, because like I said, we want to add 5,000 new supporters before 2024. I want loads of videos about all the people you don't see. Because we have around, 23, 24 staff here at Novara? Freelancers, hosts, blah, blah, blah. You see the hosts, don't you? I would love you to see more of them. I think they would, well, maybe not all of them want you to see more of them. I do. Because I think it's really important to say that what we're trying to do here takes lots of people. Lyrianne, there will be something coming out regarding the producer. Lyrianne, if I've said your name correctly, what is your medium to long-term view of Britain? Do you think this decline can or will be reversed? How do you think Britain will change as demographics change and younger generations take over? And Aaron, It's great questions, blimey. I'm reading Fully Automated Luxury Communism right now, and it's really interesting. How do you feel about the ideas of the book now that some time has passed and AI has become such a huge issue? Let's start with the first question, and then I'll pass it over to Rivkah. What is my medium to long-term view of Britain? And then you're bringing in decline, demographic change. So my medium-term view, really, up until 2030, is if I had to bet on it, obviously there'd be a Labour government after 24, 25. I think there'll be immense pressure put on it by the media, by the Tories, possibly by financial markets. I think they'll be incredibly constrained in what they do. I think they'll be punished by the market for saying boo to a goose. So I think that's where there's a huge, huge role for the left to then push that debate further to the left nationally. I think if we have national policy being dictated by the bond markets, we need to be saying to the electorate, we don't vote for the bond markets in this country. And I think when we do that, the left is going to have to be very ambitious and not just talk to the people who we normally talk to. We need to talk to the people that we don't normally talk to and who disagree with us, because we can't just let those people go to the right. There needs to be a critique from the left. So, and that's my medium-term view. Long-term, I think Europe is kind of screwed, right? Europe is really buggered. Its demographic pyramid is poor, has no energy resources, doesn't have particularly innovative companies compared to the US and China. So I'm not really that optimistic about about Europe, but that's 100 years, 50 years. And of course, there will be some exceptions to that. It is all politics. It is absolutely all politics. You know, one of the most interesting life stories for me is that of Lee Kuan Yew, who was not left-wing, although he was described as a social democrat or democratic socialist by Harold Wilson because of Singapore's land policy, which is actually very radical. And Singapore is a country which went in a dramatically different direction because of effectively a leadership cadre around Lee Kuan Yew. It could have been a very different country. It's now one of the wealthiest countries in the world per capita. It should be said a movement within the elite, but a movement nonetheless, pushed it in a historically important direction. People make history not under conditions of their own making. So that's important. In terms of Falk, honestly, not much has changed. I actually think the more time passes, the more I feel vindicated in my conclusions. The one thing I missed out really was the geopolitics and the extent to which we'll see potential confrontation between China and the US, which will have implications for technology, maybe two global internets, two approaches to how we produce technology. We've only really had one since 1989. So that'll be interesting. So the geopolitics, I sort of missed out. But actually, if you look at the stuff around renewable energy, AI, cellular agriculture, synthetic biology, demographic aging, it's stuff that really has hit the mainstream. So I'm glad you're reading it. I'd recommend other people reading it too. We're going to get the book, by the way, on the Novara Media shop, which, if you don't know, is novaramedia.shop, I think, or shop, novaramedia.com/shop. Clockwork asks, are there any more festival shows planned for the future? We did a few in Glastonbury this year, didn't we? That was interesting. We do have two panels up at TWT this year in Liverpool. They will be live streamed. I don't think you can get tickets. I might be wrong. Check the TWT website for that. We also have a question from Ali Alk. Pick a dream government. Oh, I love this one. This is great. I'll throw this over to you, Rivkah. Pick a dream government. Who would your leader, chancellor, and foreign secretary be, past or present?
Wow, I really don't think in terms of dream governments. I guess my dream, like if he could immigrate and become the Prime Minister of the UK, I guess would be Bernie. I mean, there was something amazingly historic about the prospect of a Jewish American president. But so yeah, let's have Bernie. Let's have a bit of Bernie in there. What was it? Chancellor and who else? Chancellor, who's my numbers guy? Or gal, indeed. Our very own James Meadway. His takes are always the spiciest.
Mystic Meadway. Okay.
Yeah. Mystic
Foreign
Meadway.
Secretary.
But foreign sec. This is a good question. I mean, like, I know this is a controversial one, but Emily Thornberry, just because she's just so jokes. Like, I just would love to see kind of footage of her milling around with global leaders. Just because, has anyone watched that clip of her talking about Theresa May doing a kind of walkabout video with Owen Jones back in the day? And he says to her, have you ever felt bad for Theresa May? Do you pity her? And she's like, I do. And he's like, why? And she's like, well, she just looks awful. And I just like, foreign secretary obviously isn't a very important role, but we're doing a dream blunt rotation here, and she would just make for some great, like, the kind of, it would be kind of Prince Philip levels of like ridiculous nonsense that she would say to dignitaries, and I just would love to see it.
Okay, that's great. I think for me, leader, that is so hard. Leader. I know who my chancellor would be. Marty Bird from Ozark. He just magics money from nowhere. So he'd definitely be my chancellor. Great problem solver. Foreign secretary would be Corbyn, because he'd boil so much piss. Corbyn would be like negotiating between Russia and Ukraine, and all the legacy media would go, ah. Actually, this quite calm, affable man would be trying to sort things out. He's the opposite of the kind of projection the media offers. And then leader, blimey, that is really hard. Leader. There's not many political leaders. I'd say Niccolo Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli PM, Marty Bird, well, they're not really socialists, are they? And then Corbyn, foreign sec. Corbyn pulling the strings. That is a bit of a esoteric pick, isn't it? Machiavelli, Marty Bird, and Corbyn. Past or present? Yep. Well, you didn't say imaginary, but I got there. Auntie 666. This is a great question. How do you stay engaged without spiraling into doom? How do you maintain mental health and optimism while reporting on oppression and corruption all around us? Rivkah, go on. You're the reporter, so you should probably answer that.
I've already told you guys I go to the sauna. No, but like for real, I do invest quite a lot in my mental health, and I think probably one of few journalists in this country to do that. It's like particularly being a lobby reporter, which I'm not, is like a really round the clock job. But I think most journalists take pride in sort of like burnout and working themselves into the ground. But and that's, I think, another thing that I've really found completely different about working at Novara Media. And back in previous places I've worked, they wouldn't even let me work with my headphones on, even though the office was like a war zone. Like, people were shouting at each other across this open office space. But Novara does actually kind of allow for a way better kind of working environment and work-life balance than other places that I've worked. So I think just like the like working at Novara has been good for my mental health. But yeah, I also do invest loads in going to the sauna. I meditate every day. I take regular holidays. I don't take pride in being a round the clock journalist. And I think like learning how to cultivate a slightly different MO to most journalists, where I'm not available around the clock, where I do take time for myself, where I tell people I won't get back to them immediately, but at the same time can also identify when something needs to be pushed out really quickly in order to break a story, like we did recently with Philip Glanville, the mayor of Hackney, who has now resigned following reporting that we did alongside the Morning Star. So yeah, I would say like knowing when to speed up and knowing when to slow down.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? I mean, sometimes everybody, by the way, is filled with doom about something at some point. I don't think that's, it's not. It's part of the human it's constitutive of the human experience, isn't it? In terms of not feeling it too much, I think one of the best bits of advice I ever got, or two bits of advice actually. One was, there are very few problems which can't be solved by not just walking under a tree. So I think getting out in nature, walking, is hugely important. And another one is, if there is a problem and it's being mediated through your phone, it's not a problem. You just can switch your phone off. If the problem doesn't disappear by not, turning off the phone, then it's a real problem. I think that's kind of true. So I don't know. Somebody says something nasty on social media or something like that. But that's not a problem. It's quite easy to solve. I'm not just, obviously there are things like online harassment and whatnot, but most of the time it can be solved like that. So I think, diligence with regards to getting out, being in nature is so important. Make time for it. And reading. Fiction is very relaxing. It was interesting, actually. I was talking to a psychiatrist recently on a panel. I probably couldn't afford to pay for him. He's quite a senior guy in the NHS, and he was familiar with an article I wrote about having depression and how I'd gotten out of it, really. And he said, "Well, you did some, classical things that would help. You bought a dog. Okay, that helps. Although he does annoy me sometimes. You got housing security, and you have a partner, a steady partner who you love." And that's absolutely part of it, right? I think your partnerships, your relationship to nature, other creatures. I actually think, and housing security, I think, maybe I'm going to be controversial here, I think those matter more than meaningful work. And I think on the left, people say, oh, work, if they're miserable, it's my work, or if they're happy, it's because of my work. It's very hard to be miserable if you're happy in your relationship and you're happy with your housing situation and you're getting lots of fresh air. Obviously, you want the full house, but that's just my view. I'm very happy you said that about Novara, Rivkah. That's very good to hear. The final question. This is a strange question. I don't know why it's the final question, but we only have 3 minutes left, so perhaps that's reasonable. From Joss Holden Ray, or Rhea. You tell me, Joss. He asks, Aaron, as the daddy of the left, that's Cenk Uygur, young Turks, still not me, how has the prospect of being a real-life daddy changed your politics? Well, actually, Rivkah the other day was saying how right-wing I was becoming. She was saying your daughter has... Go on.
Yeah, no, I was saying, because I saw a tweet that you did about how the greatest ills facing our society about our disposable vapes, which subsequently got banned, you were very prescient, were online porn and were social media for kids. And I was like, Aaron, your daughter isn't even born yet, and you're tweeting as if you are the father of a teenage girl. I can't. Also, I should, for transparency, say that Joss Holden Rhea is my boyfriend, and I may or may not have put him up to ask this
question. So it is Rhea. It's Rhea.
Yeah, Rhea. Yeah, Chris Rhea.
Is he related to Chris Rhea?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Well,
I know he'll be driving you home for Christmas, Rivkah.
Or for Hanukkah, who knows?
Yeah. That's really interesting. I saw Chris Rhea once in Florence, and he has a quite distinctive voice. Maybe he's with his daughter, Joss. You can tell me. I don't know. And he was buying a packet of cigarettes, and I was like, wait, that sounds like Chris. It's Chris Rhea. How has it changed my politics? Well, I do think that young people are surrounded by addictions in a way that wasn't the case when we were young. If you look at this idea, for instance, within social media of variable rewards, push notifications and little, quite alluring little notifications on your phone and whatnot, the variable rewards. Sometimes you look, have I got a notification? No. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. It's building an addiction into the systems. Big tech knew they were doing that. You often get that with gambling. The fact that we have a swathe of technology now with that tendency, and young people can access it, and they do access it every day of the week, it's for me quite mind-blowing. Has it made me more? Possibly on that. I am more worried about the world for young people, but I think I always was. This is something actually which really frustrates me, is that I'm 39. Life was a hell of a lot better, I think, for a young person when I was 15 than for a 15-year-old now. For sure. Cheaper education, easy to get on the housing ladder. The global economy hadn't collapsed. There was no pandemic. I just think that. So when somebody's there 60, 65, 70, they say, oh, you haven't been born. It was so much harder in my time. Some of those people are obviously talking sense. They may have had a very hard time. But really, I think being young now is harder than it was when I was growing up. We'll end there. Rivkah, thanks so much for this evening.
Thanks so much for having me. What a delight it's been. Yeah, we've really covered quite a range of issues, from Trump to being a father, prospective fatherhood.
Yeah, it's so weird talking to people about being a dad, because you just get 1,000,001 different points being made to you. Most of them including the words, you'll be miserable. And thanks for joining us tonight. That's all for this month with our Q&A. If you didn't get your question answered tonight, don't worry. We'll be doing this again next month. And come back tomorrow at 6 p.m. for Novara Live. I've been Aaron Bastani. This has been our monthly Q&A. We'll see you then.